Hello everyone and welcome to another session of AP Human Geography with Mr. Elrod. We're continuing on in Unit 4, discussing political organizations of space, and we've been talking a lot about borders, we've been talking a lot about boundaries, discussing the different types of borders and boundaries and how it is that those kind of are, well, not kind of, but they are a part of uh, our modern international development in terms of understanding of how states are divided. And again, even if you look at larger scales, and if you look at a country itself, of course, borders and boundaries that are established between states or cities, all of those things are important as well. So what we're going to talk about today is what exactly is the process of going through and creating the boundary or border of a state, because obviously it is an official process. So today, again, what we're going to talk about is the creating of official boundaries. Now, this is something that is a multi-step process that can take a great amount of time, because again, what we're looking at, if we remember back to one of the first videos, we talk about this idea of sovereignty, is you have two sovereign entities. You have to think about a state as kind of a living organism with rights and with emotions almost, and you have to deal with the culture of the people in terms of not wanting to offend them, or you have to think about the history and the division of people and resources and all these other types of things. So it can be an incredibly intense and long process before you create the official boundary. And we have to again remember this idea that boundaries have to be recognized by multiple parties. It just can't be two states deciding together that they're going to create an official boundary, and maybe statehood and things like this will be created and recognized. You have to get a fairly large consensus before before boundaries can actually be created and established. And then, of course, you think about this the global understanding, getting other people in the world to understand where borders and boundaries lie, so that they can then appropriately interact with that particular space, if they happen to be interacting with it on any certain level. So again, it's something that can be very difficult. It's something that can be time consuming, and I guess that's generally just the way that things work in government. It doesn't matter how simple we think the task might be, anything is difficult and time consuming. So when we talk about the different phases, the very first phase is called the definition phase, and this probably, I would assume, might be the most difficult phase, because this is where we're dealing with governments, we're dealing with bureaucracies, we're dealing with emotions and feelings and histories and people and resources and all these types of things. So this is really where the actual official language of boundary treaties is established. So they're described, they're legally negotiated between the different parties, and they're going to lay out the language that is going to define what the boundary actually is, or I guess maybe hypothetically should be, based upon their understanding. Again, I point you back to the CPG grade video on the boundary between the United States and Canada. It's really funny if you look at that circumstance and how they didn't exactly know what things really to the west of the Great Lakes looked like, and so they kind of made some guesses. The Americans and the Canadians did, as far as what, or I guess the Americans and the British, as far as what the boundary would be to the west there. Anyway, so you have two examples here, some interesting situations. Of course, this is the Berlin Conference, 1888. Where the European countries are getting together and carving up Africa, and you think about that situation. The Europeans kind of have a basic understanding of what I guess some of Africa looks like, but they're not really exactly sure all the elements and the intricacies of Africa, and they're trying to carve it up, and they're trying to state their claim for their different countries and things like that. So they're in there negotiating, and of course the greatest maybe insult is the fact that absolutely no Africans were even there to either contest for their own people or advocate for themselves or whatever. So you have these complete outsiders describing and negotiating boundaries of parts of empires on the continent of Africa. Over here to the left is kind of an interesting situation that's been happening between Georgia and Tennessee, and a situation that has arisen based upon a misunderstanding of where a boundary is actually supposed to be. So you can see that, and this has been within the last couple of years, and this has gone up to the state legislature and things like that, and Georgia has sued Tennessee, and all kinds of interesting things have happened. So you see here in this infographic, this red line right here is actually the official boundary line based on the treaty that Georgia and Tennessee have. But I think it's because of the lack of technology they had when they established the line, and that some of the difficulty they had in establishing this line, because you have the Appalachian Mountains and some pretty rugged terrain up here in this area, is they actually established the line further south than it was supposed to be, and so now you have these issues. And if you pay attention to the national news at all, Georgia and some of the surrounding states have been having issues with water, and really a need for water, and you can see that a part of that would actually put more water resources into Georgia, and so this has become kind of a bigger issue. So even though the language was that this is what the intended boundary is supposed to be, because of lack of technology, you have this line that's a little bit further south. And now in the year 2013, 2014, this is creating legal issues between the state of Georgia and the state of Tennessee. And so I'm not exactly sure how that'll work out and how that's going to what's going to happen with that. Definitely something interesting to look at. So once all the negotiating has gone on, and once all of the kind of haggling back and forth has been decided on, then you have what's called the delimitation phase. Sorry, I don't think I've ever pronounced that correctly. Delimitation phase happens, and this is when you start putting the lines on maps. And so, obviously important to agree on things, but then we're talking about putting the lines on the map so that people are out there in the world can see and understand and physically and kind of conceptually understand where this is supposed to be, how it divides up the landscape, what exactly it's supposed to look like. And we have one of our newest states, South Sudan, even with some disputed territories between Sudan and I guess Kenya, trying to establish some boundaries. And then of course we talked about Western Sahara earlier in the unit, how Western Sahara is really not recognized by just about anybody. But that's going to be important, because if you look at old educational materials, you look at old maps and the Soviet Union and things like that, the way that our understanding of the way the political boundaries were drawn, I guess it's that idea that if it's out there, then it ends up becoming truth, and so we need to make sure that the information that's out there is accurate. So we have the delimitation phase. Then we have what's called the demarcation phase. So you can imagine that the reason the delimitation phase takes place first is because it's much easier to put things on a map and change maps than it is to actually get out there and put physical elements on the landscape. So of course the demarcation, we're talking about putting the official marker on the landscape that's going to divide the two different areas. And of course this is really important for humans, so we can actually, especially in areas that maybe don't have a physical feature, that's going to help us to distinguish between one place and another. And you look at some things in the news where somebody accidentally, I don't know how accidentally you do this, but cross into, let's say, North Korea. That would be a very unfortunate incident to occur. You may be traveling in China, or I don't think you could accidentally go from South Korea to North Korea, but you're on kind of the border there between North Korea and China, and you accidentally cross over. If there's no marker, you're captured and put in a re-education camp. Doesn't sound like a whole lot of fun. You had some folks who were hiking on, I believe it was the border between Iraq and Iran not too long, a couple of years ago, and they accidentally crossed over into Iran, and they also were arrested. So the markers can be quite helpful, especially if you have the potential to get arrested and put in jail. That's no good. And so one of the interesting things is that if you look at the different marker that's on the landscape, that can kind of tell you something about the relationship between the places. Of course, we have the United States and Mexico border here, this large fence that tells you something about the relationship. Not necessarily, and of course in this instance, not necessarily between the two states, but how the states feel about movement between those places, what kind of image they want to portray. So you have this tall fence. This is an image over here to the right is an image of border between the United States and Canada. These nice little obelisks that kind of dot the landscape, and there's a definite difference here between the image the United States and Canada are trying to put off versus the image that the United States and Mexico are trying to put off. Or maybe you go something a little bit even more relaxed in the Schengen area, in the European Union, the border there between Belgium and the Netherlands, just some nice markers on the floor there, or on the ground there, with the country symbols on either side. And of course, understanding where you are is important, not just for legal reasons, but also for tax purposes. Maybe going to school administratively, in terms of who are you responsible, who you report to, things like that. So again, you look at the demarcation phase, important so that we as humans can understand where the boundary is. But even more interestingly, if you look at maybe the type of boundary that is there, the demarcation that occurs, it can tell you something a little bit about relationships between states. And then the final phase is what's called the administration phase. So once you have it on the map, once you have it marked out on the landscape, then it's up to the two sides to administer that boundary correctly. Basically, administration is an understanding of how this border is going to work. Is it going to be something like the border between the United States and Mexico that's fairly restrictive? And of course, the United States is going to rely on Mexico to, kind of hold up its end of the bargain and protect the border and things like that. Or is it going to be something like between the Netherlands and Belgium, you kind of go back and forth? Or, states in the United States where when you cross from one state to another, it's not a checkpoint. You just kind of go about your business, and you see the nice little sign, welcome to whatever, welcome to Florida, welcome to Tennessee. Oops, I'm going backwards. And so again, it's going to have to be an agreement there, and each side needs to keep up its end of the bargain. Whether we're talking about checkpoints in Mexico, checking passports, checking goods that are coming in and out of the country, things like that. I thought these were kind of interesting, and of course, this is within a country. Mecca and Jerusalem on the Temple Mount. Of course, within a country can really establish whatever rules it wants when it comes to administering borders and boundaries. It doesn't really have to agree with anyone. These are highly religious sites. Of course, the city of Mecca, and the holiest site in all of Islam. You see there the sign says no entry for Muslims. Obviously, you have to prove. I'm not exactly sure how that happens. I'm sure it's sending letters into the government, things like that, to prove your authenticity of a religion. And this one over here, absolutely no one, according to the Torah, is forbidden for any person to enter the area of the Temple Mount due to its sacredness. And so, of course, the Israeli government and the Saudi Arabian government is going to be take those the administration of those boundaries for those places very seriously. Again, those are a little bit different because it's within the country. You don't necessarily have to worry about, they don't necessarily have to come to terms or agreement with anyone. They get to administer that border or boundary however they like because it's within their country. But think about any time you've traveled. Think about any time you've gone to a different country. You see some of the images here. You think about maybe the checkpoints you've had to go to, passports, you've had to declare certain things. And again, that's all based on an understanding between two states. And again, each state relying on the other to do the things that it's supposed to do as a result of the agreement that they have. So that is all the time that we have for today on creating official boundaries. When we come back next time, we're going to be talking about oceanic boundaries, and then we'll move into boundary disputes. Because what would a discussion on political geography be without a discussion on disputes and divisions? So we hope to see you next time.